Most people think change starts with willpower, but science shows it starts with your body. If you know how to control your nervous system, your habits, your focus, your mood, you can literally hack your own behavior. Today, I'm going to show you how. Because once you understand how your brain and body work together, you stop relying on motivation and start building a system that makes the best version of you inevitable. I'm a neuroscientist, and for the last 2 decades, I've studied how the brain shapes behavior and, more importantly, how we can shape the brain. Whether you want to break a bad habit, become more productive, or just feel more in control, this talk will give you practical, science-backed tools to take control of your nervous system and hack your behavior starting today. Your nervous system is the master control center of all your behavior. Every decision you make, every habit you perform, and every emotion you feel originates from the electrical and chemical signals running through this system. It's not just something that reacts to the world, it's actively shaping your experience of the world. Most people think their behavior is simply a matter of character, motivation, or discipline, but the truth is that your capacity to act in a certain way is directly tied to the state of your nervous system at any given moment. At the core of this system is the balance between two branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. These aren't abstract concepts, they're real circuits in your body and brain that are constantly shifting, toggling you between states of alertness and calm, action and recovery, readiness and reflection. The sympathetic system is what's often called fight or flight, and it ramps up your body's energy and focus so you can deal with immediate challenges. The parasympathetic system, on the other hand, is known as rest and digest. It helps you slow down, recover, and process. Your behavior is never happening in a vacuum. It's always occurring within the context of which system is dominant. Let's take a practical example. Imagine you're trying to have a difficult conversation with someone. If your sympathetic system is highly activated, your heart rate is elevated, your pupils are dilated, your muscles are tight, you're more likely to be reactive, to speak quickly, to interrupt, to get defensive. But if your parasympathetic system is active, your breathing is slow, your heart rate is stable, you're much more likely to listen, to choose your words, and to regulate your emotions. The content of your character doesn't change in that moment. What changes is your internal physiological state, and that state dictates your behavior. Understanding this gives you a profound advantage. It means that you don't have to try to force better behavior from a place of stress or tension. Instead, you can learn to shift your state first, then act. This is the opposite of how most people approach change. They say, I need to be more disciplined, or I should stop procrastinating, without realizing that procrastination is often just a reflection of a nervous system that's stuck in a threat response, trying to avoid danger, even if the danger is just imagined. You have tools right now that can influence your nervous system directly. Your breath, your posture, your visual focus, even your movement patterns, they all send signals to your brain about what state you're in. When you deliberately control those inputs, you're not just calming yourself down or hyping yourself up, you're changing the baseline from which your behavior arises. Science is clear on this. Behavior is state-dependent. In experiments where subjects are placed in states of high arousal, through noise, light, or even posture, their decision-making skews dramatically. They become more impulsive, less reflective, more prone to habitual or defensive actions. But when researchers create conditions that activate the parasympathetic system, soft lighting, slow breathing, mindful attention, those same individuals become more creative, more patient, and more strategic. This isn't about personality, it's about physiology. Even deeper, your brain learns patterns of behavior through repetition of states. If you're often stressed, your nervous system becomes wired to expect and recreate stress. If you're often calm before taking action, your brain begins to associate calmness with productivity, and that becomes your new default. So in this way, learning to regulate your nervous system is not just a tool for short-term behavior hacking, it's a long-term strategy for identity change. You are, in a very real sense, training your nervous system to support the kind of person you want to become. The nervous system is both the foundation and the gatekeeper. If you want to change your behavior, whether it's how you speak, work, focus, or relate to others, you must start with the system that generates behavior in the first place. You can't outthink it. You can't overpower it with will. You have to work with it. When you do, everything else becomes easier. The path to lasting change becomes clearer, and your actions begin to align more naturally with your goals, not because you're trying harder, but because you're operating from a state that makes the right behavior feel effortless. That is the power of understanding and mastering your nervous system. The visual system is not just a passive way to see the world, it's one of the most powerful levers you have to control your internal state, and as a result, your behavior. What you look at, how you look at it, and the way your eyes move through the world all send immediate deep signals to your brain about what kind of environment you're in and how you should respond to it. Your eyes are quite literally part of your brain. They are not separate from the nervous system, they are an extension of it. So when we talk about hacking behavior, one of the most accessible and underrated tools is learning how to consciously use your visual system. Most people don't realize that the way you focus your vision directly affects your level of arousal and alertness. When you concentrate your gaze on a single point, what's known as focal vision or central vision, you send a signal to your brain that something specific demands your attention. This kind of visual focus increases levels of norepinephrine and acetylcholine, which are chemicals associated with heightened alertness and cognitive engagement. This narrow focus cues your system to prepare for action. It's like flipping a switch in your brain that says, "Let's go." This is incredibly useful when you want to work, study, or engage deeply with a task. You can literally prime your brain for focus and productivity just by directing your eyes in a certain way. On the flip side, when you soften your gaze, allowing your eyes to take in the periphery, what's called panoramic vision, your nervous system interprets this as a signal of safety. It means you're not fixated on a threat or a target, and you can afford to relax. This kind of visual mode activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing heart rate and cortisol levels, and bringing your body into a more calm, regulated state. This is not just theory, it's been demonstrated in numerous studies where individuals can lower their anxiety and increase their sense of well-being simply by broadening their gaze and scanning their environment calmly. It's the body's way of saying, "We're okay, there's no immediate danger." These shifts in visual attention are not abstract. They have concrete effects on your behavior. Think about how differently you respond to challenges when you're in a state of calm versus when you're stressed. By learning to shift your visual mode intentionally, you gain the ability to move between those states on demand. If you're about to walk into a stressful meeting, you can take a moment to soften your gaze, look at the horizon, take in the room with panoramic vision, and send a signal to your body to calm down. If you're about to start a focused task, you can direct your gaze to a single point and immediately cue your brain to engage and block out distractions. This isn't something you have to practice for years to benefit from. You can try it right now. Focus your gaze on a single word or object in front of you and notice how your attention sharpens. Now, without moving your eyes, become aware of the space to the left and right of your vision, your periphery. Notice how your body begins to calm, your breathing may slow, and your sense of tension may drop slightly. These are subtle shifts, but they accumulate. Over time, they train your nervous system to be more flexible and responsive, and that flexibility is the foundation of behavioral change. There's also a psychological dimension to visual control. When you train your eyes to focus on what matters, literally and figuratively, you train your mind to do the same. Your attention follows your gaze, so if you're constantly darting from one screen to another, switching between tabs, checking your phone, scanning a dozen sources of input at once, you're not just scattering your focus, you're training your brain to operate in a state of shallow, fragmented engagement. That becomes your default mode, but if you regularly practice visual focus, your brain starts to favor deep, sustained attention. That in turn changes how you work, how you think, and even how you interact with others. Your visual habits also influence your emotional state. For example, looking upward slightly can improve mood and increase energy, while downward gaze is often associated with introspection or even depressive states. These patterns are so consistent that some psychologists use eye direction as a diagnostic tool for emotional and cognitive processing. This means that changing where and how you look can also shift how you feel, and when you change how you feel, you change how you behave. Breath is one of the most powerful yet overlooked tools we have for changing our behavior because it gives us direct access to the nervous system. Unlike many other systems in the body, like digestion or hormone release, breathing is both automatic and voluntary. That means your body breathes on its own without you thinking about it, but you also have the ability to consciously change the rhythm, depth, and pattern of your breath. And when you do, you're not just moving air in and out of your lungs, you're sending signals to your brain about what's happening in your environment and how it should respond. This is why breath is often referred to as the remote control of the brain. Every inhale and exhale is tied to a specific neurological and physiological response. When you inhale, your heart rate increases slightly. This is because Inhalation activates the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, the one responsible for alertness, readiness, and action. When you exhale, especially when you exhale slowly or deeply, your heart rate decreases. This is because exhalation activates the parasympathetic branch, the part of the nervous system associated with calm, relaxation, and recovery. So, by manipulating your breathing pattern, you can shift the balance of your nervous system. You can go from anxious to calm, from sleepy to alert, from reactive to reflective, all by changing how you breathe. This isn't a spiritual concept, it's a biological reality. Consider the physiological sigh, a pattern of breathing that consists of 2 inhales followed by 1 long exhale. This pattern occurs naturally when your body needs to rapidly reset levels of carbon dioxide in the blood, and it's one of the fastest ways to reduce stress and return to a balanced state. Neuroscientific research has shown that just 1 or 2 physiological sighs can significantly reduce levels of physiological arousal, lowering your heart rate, quieting your mind, and giving you a sense of immediate relief. You can use this anytime before a big presentation, during a moment of overwhelm, or even just to reset between tasks. The breath is also intimately tied to your emotional state. Think about how you breathe when you're angry: short, shallow, rapid. When you're sad, long, slow sighs. When you're panicked, hyperventilation. Your emotions automatically change your breath, but what's more powerful is that by changing your breath, you can influence your emotions. It's a two-way street. That's why breathwork is at the center of so many therapeutic practices, from mindfulness meditation to cognitive behavioral therapy to elite performance training. It's not about believing in a technique, it's about understanding the neurobiology of how breathing alters brain function. The key lies in consistency and intentionality. If you're constantly breathing in a shallow way, mouth breathing, upper chest fast, you're telling your brain that something's wrong, that you're in danger, even if you're just sitting at your desk. Your brain, interpreting that signal, releases stress hormones like cortisol and primes your body for a fight or flight response. This leads to more anxiety, poor focus, reduced digestion, and impaired decision-making. But if you learn to take deep, slow breaths through your nose, expanding the diaphragm and controlling the exhale, your body starts to shift into a state of safety. The brain says, "We're okay," and begins to reallocate resources to higher cognitive functions like planning, creativity, and emotional regulation. There's a behavioral component to this as well. When you're in a calm state brought on by proper breathing, you're much more likely to make rational decisions, stick to your goals, and act in alignment with your values. Your behavior becomes a reflection of intentionality rather than reactivity. On the other hand, when your breathing is dysregulated, your actions tend to be impulsive, short-term, and emotionally driven. So learning to control your breath is, in a very real way, learning to control your behavior. Different breathing patterns can serve different purposes. If you need to wake up and get energized, rapid inhales and short holds can stimulate alertness. If you need to fall asleep or wind down, slow, deep breathing, especially longer exhales, can help your body transition into rest mode. The ability to shift gears in this way gives you an enormous advantage in both daily life and long-term behavior change. You are no longer at the mercy of your environment or your emotional state. You become the operator of your own nervous system. Training this doesn't require hours of meditation or complicated routines. Even just taking 1 to 3 minutes a few times a day to consciously breathe in a way that supports the state you want to be in, whether it's calm, alert, or focused, can rewire your nervous system over time. Your brain learns through repetition. If you repeatedly enter a calm, focused state through breath before a task, your brain begins to associate that task with a state of flow rather than stress. This is how you build behavioral change from the inside out. The breath is a tool that's always with you. It doesn't require equipment, money, or special conditions. It's accessible at any moment, and its effects are immediate. It's not abstract, it's mechanical. When you harness your breath, you're not just managing stress, you're building a foundation of control that allows you to choose your response instead of reacting blindly. That's the essence of hacking behavior, not trying harder, but using the right tools in the right way to create the internal conditions for the behavior you want. Breath is one of those tools. It's ancient, it's backed by modern science, and it's available to you right now. Behavior is not something that arises in a vacuum. nor is it purely the result of conscious choice or deliberate effort. One of the most important truths you can learn when trying to change your habits, improve your focus, or regulate your emotions is that behavior is state-dependent. What this means is that your internal physiological and psychological state at any given moment profoundly influences what you're capable of doing, how you do it, and whether you do it at all. In other words, it's not just about having the right intention, it's about being in the right state to act on that intention. Your internal state, driven by your nervous system, hormones, neurochemistry, energy levels, and even your posture, creates a kind of filter that determines your range of behavioral possibilities. When you're in a stressed, anxious, or overwhelmed state, your brain is operating in survival mode. In this mode, higher-level functions like planning, reflection, emotional regulation, and patience are deprioritized in favor of speed, reaction, and self-protection. This is not a character flaw, it's how your biology is designed. Your brain is trying to keep you alive. But what it means is that trying to force a calm, thoughtful, or disciplined behavior when you're in a dysregulated state is like trying to play a beautiful piano piece while someone is slamming the keys randomly from the other side. You might know the notes, but your system just won't cooperate. Now consider the opposite. When you're in a regulated, calm, and focused state, your brain opens up access to the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, long-term planning, impulse control, and rational thought. This is the seat of conscious behavior. When you are in this state, your chances of following through on your goals, making good decisions, and maintaining behavioral consistency dramatically increase. You don't need as much willpower because your biology is aligned with your intentions. You're not pushing against yourself, you're working with your own internal systems. This has enormous implications for behavior change. Most people try to change their behavior through sheer force of will. They try to override their current state, stress, exhaustion, distraction, by pushing harder. They say things like, "I just need to focus," or "I have to stop procrastinating," without addressing the real issue. The state they're in is not supportive of that behavior. It's not that they don't want to change, or even that they don't know how to change. It's that their nervous system is in a state that makes the desired behavior extremely difficult to access. This is why many people fail to stick to new habits. They're trying to plant seeds in frozen soil. The good news is that your state is not fixed. It can be changed, and it can be changed quickly. Using tools like breathwork, visual control, movement, light exposure, or even music and environment, you can deliberately shift your internal state before attempting to change your behavior. This might mean doing a short breathing protocol to calm your system before you sit down to work, or taking a walk in the sun to elevate your alertness before a big task. These might seem like small things, but what they're really doing is priming your system for successful action. They're setting the stage for behavior to emerge naturally, without so much resistance. The science behind this is clear. When your physiological state supports your cognitive goals, behavior becomes easier, more fluid, and more consistent. Studies have shown, for instance, that subjects placed in high-stress states make more impulsive decisions, exhibit lower empathy, and have reduced working memory. The very same subjects, in a calm or regulated state, perform better on every measure. Their capacity hasn't changed, only their state has. And this is true for all of us. The version of you that shows up when you're calm, energized, and clear-headed is fundamentally different from the version of you that shows up when you're drained, reactive, or overwhelmed. This understanding also helps explain why people often feel like they're two different people depending on the day, the time, or the situation. One day you're focused, productive, disciplined. The next day you're distracted, avoidant, and stuck in old habits. That inconsistency isn't because you've suddenly lost your values or forgot your goals. It's because your state has shifted. Once you learn to recognize the patterns of your internal states and develop tools to shift them intentionally, you start to gain real control over your behavior. It's also worth noting that state dependence doesn't just affect what behaviors are available to you. It affects how your brain records those behaviors. If you repeatedly perform a behavior in the same internal state, your brain starts to associate that behavior with that state. This means if you always study while feeling anxious, your brain wires that link between studying and anxiety. But if you intentionally enter a focused, calm state before studying and do it repeatedly, your brain begins to associate studying with that productive state. Over time, this reconditions the behavior, making it easier and more automatic. So if you want to change your behavior, don't start with behavior, start with state. Identify the state that supports the behavior you want, whether it's calmness, energy, focus, confidence, and then learn how to enter that state on demand. This is not abstract advice, it's neuroscience. The body controls the brain, and the brain controls behavior. When you change the body, through breath, vision, movement, or posture, you send a signal to the brain, and that signal changes your internal state. And from that new state, new behaviors become not only possible, but sustainable. Trying to build a new habit or break an old one without managing your state is like trying to sail a boat without paying attention to the wind. You might move, but it will be a struggle. When you align your behavior with the wind of your internal state, when you use tools to set that wind intentionally, suddenly you're moving in the right direction with far less effort. That's the power of state-dependent behavior. And once you learn to work with it instead of against it, the process of change becomes not only more effective, but more enjoyable. Your environment is not neutral. It is constantly shaping your behavior, your focus, your stress levels, your energy, and even your perception of time. Most people underestimate the power of their surroundings, believing that change comes solely from internal motivation or discipline. But the truth is, your brain and nervous system are highly responsive to the cues around you: visual, auditory, tactile, spatial, and even social. And because of this, one of the most effective ways to change your behavior is not by pushing harder internally, but by adjusting the external conditions that influence how you think and feel. Every object, sound, light source, and layout in your environment is like a piece of code that your brain reads and responds to. For instance, clutter isn't just visually distracting, it actually increases cognitive load. When your brain sees a messy desk or a chaotic room, it has to process more information, even if you're not consciously paying attention to it. That increased processing burden leads to mental fatigue, reduced focus, and a higher likelihood of procrastination. In contrast, a clean, orderly environment sends a very different message. It cues the brain that things are under control, which promotes clarity, calm, and better decision-making. Lighting is another major environmental lever. Human physiology evolved in a natural light-dark cycle. When you expose yourself to bright, natural light in the morning, especially within the first hour of waking, you activate the brain's wakefulness circuits. This suppresses melatonin, increases cortisol in a healthy, activating way, and sets your circadian rhythm for the rest of the day. If you spend your morning in dim, indoor light and then flood your senses with artificial light late at night, you disrupt these systems, making it harder to focus during the day and harder to sleep at night. Over time, this misalignment leads to irritability, poor performance, and inconsistent behavior. But by simply adjusting the lighting around you, more natural light in the morning, dimmer and warmer light in the evening, you can help your brain stay in rhythm with its optimal functioning. Sound also plays a powerful role. Constant background noise, unpredictable interruptions, or even subtle sounds like buzzing electronics can elevate stress hormones without you realizing it. Your brain evolved to monitor sound for threats. So when there's noise, especially human speech or mechanical humming, your attention is automatically pulled, even if you try to ignore it. On the flip side, certain types of sounds like low-frequency hums, white noise, or natural ambient sounds can actually enhance focus and calm. Many people notice they think better near water or in nature, and this isn't coincidence. These sounds entrain brain activity into rhythms that promote relaxed alertness, a perfect state for deep work, creative thought, or emotional regulation. Temperature and air quality matter too. Warm, stuffy rooms tend to reduce alertness and make you sluggish. Cool, well-ventilated environments signal energy and awakeness to the brain. Something as simple as opening a window, adjusting a fan, or moving to a different space can instantly change how your body feels and how your mind responds. Again, we're not talking about motivation or mindset. We're talking about using the body's built-in systems as behavioral levers. Then there's the social component of your environment. Who you're around physically or digitally matters. If you're constantly surrounded by people who are anxious, distracted, or negative, those states become contagious. Your brain picks up on facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, and energy levels from those around you and mirrors them unconsciously. This is known as social contagion, and it's a powerful force in shaping behavior. But the reverse is also true. If you put yourself in environments where people are focused, positive, and driven, your brain starts to match that tone. Even if you're not directly interacting with those people, their energy shifts your internal state. Your environment also influences how much friction there is between you and the behavior you want to perform. If your phone is within reach while you're working, chances are high you'll pick it up because the friction is low. But if you put it in another room, or use an app to lock it down for a while, you've increased friction in a way that supports your goal. Similarly, if you want to work out in the morning, laying out your clothes the night before reduces decision-making and makes it easier to follow through. If you want to eat healthier, having whole foods visible and snacks hidden changes your behavior without requiring more willpower. In all these cases, you're not trying to force yourself, you're designing your environment to make the desired behavior the path of least resistance. Environmental cues also anchor habits. When you repeatedly perform a behavior in a specific place, your brain begins to associate that location with that activity. This is why you should avoid doing work in bed or eating in front of your computer. If your brain learns that your bed is a place for emails or your desk is a place for snacking, it blurs the line between contexts and behaviors. But if you intentionally separate spaces, one for rest, one for work, one for food, you train your brain to enter the right state more quickly when you're in that space. This spatial conditioning becomes an unconscious behavioral support system. You can also use environmental design to shift your identity. The objects you surround yourself with signal to your brain what kind of person you are. If your space is filled with books, tools, or reminders of your goals, it reinforces your self-concept as someone who values growth, action, and discipline. If your environment is dominated by distractions, clutter, or passive entertainment, it subtly reinforces a different identity. Over time, these cues don't just influence what you do, they influence how you see yourself, and how you see yourself is one of the strongest drivers of long-term behavior. The key idea here is that your environment is not something that just exists around you, it is constantly shaping what's possible for you. The goal is to stop being a passive participant in that process and start being a conscious designer of it. You don't need to control everything, but you can take control of a few high-impact elements: light, sound, space, friction, social cues, and visual reminders. By doing so, you create a kind of behavioral scaffolding, an invisible support structure that helps you show up as the person you want to be, with far less effort. Behavioral change doesn't have to feel like an uphill battle. When your environment is aligned with your goals, behavior becomes natural. When it's misaligned, even the best intentions struggle to survive. So before you ask yourself why you're not following through, ask yourself what your environment is priming you to do. Because whether you realize it or not, your surroundings are speaking to your nervous system all day long. The question is, are they saying what you need them to say? One of the most powerful and often underestimated tools for changing behavior is the simple act of tracking. The reason tracking works isn't just because it helps you remember what you did, it works because it makes the invisible visible. Most of our behaviors are automatic. We go through our day driven by habits, impulses, and emotional states, often without realizing exactly what we're doing, when we're doing it, or why. We underestimate how often we get distracted, how little time we actually spend on deep work, how many times we check our phones, or how often we eat when we're not hungry. This lack of awareness creates a massive gap between our intentions and our actions. Tracking is the bridge that closes that gap. When you track your behavior, even in the most basic form, just writing something down or tapping it into an app, you're doing something very important neurologically. You're engaging the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, decision-making, and self-monitoring. You're interrupting the automatic loop of stimulus and response, and inserting a moment of consciousness. That moment matters. It breaks the pattern and gives you a window of agency. Tracking says to your brain, pay attention, this matters. This act of observing your behavior, without judgment, initiates what psychologists call self-regulation. It's not about being perfect or even making a change immediately. It's about creating a feedback loop between your behavior and your awareness. That loop is where change begins. Just like a pilot needs constant feedback about altitude, speed, and direction to stay on course, Your brain needs feedback about your daily actions to stay aligned with your goals. Without that feedback, you drift, often without realizing it. The beauty of tracking is that it turns vague aspirations into concrete data. Saying you want to read more or eat better or be more focused is abstract. But writing down that you read for 10 minutes, ate a processed snack at 3 p.m., or checked social media 17 times in one afternoon creates specificity. And specificity is what makes change possible. You can't optimize what you don't measure. When you begin to track, you often uncover patterns you weren't even aware of, like the fact that you lose focus after a certain kind of meeting, or that poor sleep consistently leads to more sugar cravings. These insights are golden, because once you see them, you can begin to design around them. But tracking isn't just diagnostic, it's also motivational. The human brain is wired to respond to progress. Even small improvements, when seen visually over time, generate a neurochemical reward. This is known as the progress principle, and it taps directly into the dopamine system. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about motivation, anticipation, and effort. When you track and see that you meditated 3 days in a row, or that your screen time dropped by 20%, your brain gets a hit of reinforcement that says, keep going. That reinforcement builds momentum, and momentum is one of the most reliable predictors of long-term change. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you start tracking. You move from being reactive to proactive. You stop feeling like your day is happening to you, and you start to feel like you're directing it. This shift in agency is incredibly important. It builds what psychologists call self-efficacy, the belief that your actions have an effect, and that belief is the foundation of all sustainable behavior change. When people feel out of control, they stop trying, but when they can see even a tiny correlation between what they do and what they experience, they regain the motivation to keep moving forward. Another powerful aspect of tracking is accountability. When your behavior is recorded, even if only for yourself, it adds a layer of social and psychological pressure to follow through. You don't want to break the chain. You don't want to lie to yourself. This gentle pressure can be the difference between acting on a habit and letting it slide. It's not about guilt, it's about alignment. Tracking helps you align your actions with your values in real time. Importantly, tracking doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming. In fact, the simpler it is, the more likely you are to stick with it. A checkmark on a calendar, a tally in a notebook, a quick journal entry, or a color-coded block in an app. All of these can be effective. The key is consistency and honesty. You're not tracking to impress anyone. You're tracking to build awareness and momentum. You're becoming a scientist of your own behavior, collecting data not to judge yourself, but to understand yourself. There's also an emotional benefit to tracking. It creates closure. Instead of ending your day with a vague sense of how it went, you have a record, a story of what actually happened. This helps reduce anxiety and creates a sense of completion. It also helps you reflect and adjust. If your energy was low or your productivity dipped, you can look back and identify potential causes. Did you sleep poorly, skip your workout, spend too much time in reactive tasks? Tracking gives you clues, and those clues become strategies. Finally, tracking builds identity. Every time you track a behavior, you reinforce the idea that you are someone who pays attention, who takes responsibility, who is intentional about life. This identity shift is crucial. Behavior that aligns with identity becomes sustainable. When you stop trying to be healthy and start seeing yourself as someone who is healthy, who tracks, who adjusts, who learns, your actions follow. Tracking isn't just about what you do, it's about who you become through doing it. In the end, tracking is a form of self-respect. It says, my time, my energy, and my goals matter enough to pay attention to them. It's not about control, it's about connection. Connection to your own patterns, your own biology, your own potential. And when you build that connection, behavior change stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like an unfolding. You're not forcing change, you're revealing the path that was always there, waiting to be seen. One of the most misunderstood aspects of behavior change is the role of identity. Most people try to change what they do without changing how they see themselves. They focus on actions, eat better, exercise more, work harder, without realizing that sustainable behavior grows out of identity, not the other way around. The truth is, you act consistently with who you believe you are. If there's a conflict between your behavior and your self-image, your identity will always win. That's why trying to adopt new habits without addressing your identity often leads to failure. You might succeed for a little while through willpower, but eventually your subconscious pulls you back to what it knows, to what feels familiar. You can't outrun the story you're telling yourself about who you are. The key then is to intentionally construct a new narrative, a version of yourself that is aligned with the behaviors you want to sustain. This doesn't mean faking it or lying to yourself. It means updating your internal model of who you are based on your goals, values, and the kind of life you want to live. The brain is a storytelling machine. Every experience you have, every memory, every repeated action, these all feed into your ongoing story. When you begin to act in new ways and tell yourself a new story that supports those actions, you begin to shift not just what you do but who you are becoming. Identity-based change is powerful because it taps into the deep architecture of the brain, how it processes patterns, stores habits, and regulates motivation. When you begin to see yourself as a disciplined person, or a healthy person, or a focused person, your brain looks for evidence to support that identity. It starts filtering your environment, your thoughts, and your decisions through that lens. You don't have to convince yourself to get up early to run, you do it because that's what runners do. You don't have to fight to avoid junk food, you skip it because it doesn't align with who you are anymore. When identity drives behavior, resistance decreases because your actions feel natural. They become expressions of your self-image rather than battles against your instincts. But here's the subtle truth: identity is not fixed. It is malleable, fluid, constantly being shaped by your behavior and your interpretations of that behavior. Every time you make a decision, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you believe you are. Even small decisions count. When you choose to read for 5 minutes instead of scrolling social media, that's a vote for being someone who values growth. When you do one push-up, even if it's all you can manage, that's a vote for being someone who doesn't give up. These votes accumulate. They don't need to be perfect or dramatic. They just need to be consistent. Over time, the accumulation of these votes builds a new identity. And once that identity takes hold, your behavior begins to reflect it almost effortlessly. Of course, the process isn't instant. Identity change takes time. It's layered, like sediment. But what accelerates this process is conscious reinforcement. When you deliberately reflect on your actions, when you say to yourself, "That's like me," or "I'm the kind of person who does this," you're reinforcing the new narrative. You're strengthening the connection between action and identity. Neuroscientifically, this is about myelination, the process by which neural pathways become faster and more automatic through repetition. But it's also about meaning. When you attach personal meaning to your actions, they become more than behaviors, they become statements of who you are. It's also important to understand that your current identity may include limiting beliefs that hold you back. You may have absorbed ideas about yourself from your past, your family, your failures, or your fears. "I'm not disciplined. I'm not creative. I'm not good with money." These beliefs may feel like facts, but they're actually stories you've repeated long enough that your brain treats them as truth. Changing your identity requires challenging these beliefs, not with blind optimism, but with evidence. You start by doing small things that contradict the old story. You prove to yourself, through action, that a new story is possible. Each time you do, you weaken the old identity and strengthen the new one. There's a reason why some of the most transformative moments in life involve shifts in identity. When someone becomes a parent, or starts a business, or survives a crisis, their sense of who they are changes and their behavior follows. But you don't have to wait for a dramatic event to shift your identity. You can initiate that process deliberately right now. Start by asking, who do I want to become? Not just what do I want to do, but who do I want to be? Get specific. What does that person value? How do they act when things get hard? How do they structure their day? Then take even the smallest action that aligns with that vision. That action becomes the seed of a new identity. And every time you repeat it, you water that seed. This process also creates a feedback loop. Identity shapes behavior, and behavior reinforces identity. The more you act in alignment with who you want to become, the more you believe you are that person. And the more you believe it, the easier it becomes to keep acting that way. Over time, this creates a kind of behavioral flywheel, a self-sustaining engine of growth. One of the most empowering realizations is that you don't have to wait until you fully believe in a new identity to start acting on it. In fact, the belief often comes after the action. You don't become confident by thinking confident thoughts, you become confident by doing things that require courage. You don't become disciplined by waiting to feel disciplined, you become disciplined by showing up even when it's hard. The action creates the evidence, and the evidence builds the belief. At its core, behavior change is about identity change. You're not just trying to change what you do, you're trying to change who you are becoming. That's a much deeper, more lasting form of transformation. It's not surface level, it's structural. When you update your identity to match the future you want, you unlock an internal alignment that makes change not only possible but inevitable. You stop feeling like you're faking it. You start to feel like you're finally becoming who you were meant to be all along. One of the most crucial aspects of behavior change is recognizing the role of emotions in shaping what we do or don't do. Many people assume that behavior change is a logical process. If you know what's good for you, the thinking goes, you should be able to simply act on that knowledge. However, the reality is that emotions govern much of what we do. We don't just act based on logic, we act based on how we feel. Whether we like it or not, our emotional states play a central role in every decision we make, and understanding how emotions influence behavior can be the key to unlocking lasting change. Emotions are essentially signals from our body and brain designed to help us navigate the world. They are evolutionary tools that guide us toward things that enhance our survival and away from things that threaten our well-being. Fear helps us avoid danger, joy motivates us to engage with life, sadness encourages reflection, and anger can spur us to take action. But over time, these emotional responses become more complex. While they still serve their primal functions, they also get entangled in our modern lives with layers of stress, societal pressure, and cognitive distortions. This is why our emotions can sometimes seem unpredictable or illogical. They are influenced by a vast range of factors beyond the immediate situation. When it comes to behavior change, we often assume that we can override our emotional responses with sheer willpower or self-discipline. But the truth is, emotions tend to be far more powerful than we give them credit for. For example, consider the common struggle of wanting to eat healthy but being pulled toward comfort food when stressed or anxious. You might logically know that eating an apple or a salad is the better choice, but the emotional impulse to reach for something that soothes you in the moment can feel overwhelming. This happens because the brain, when under stress, craves quick emotional relief. The dopamine hit from eating sugary or fatty foods gives an immediate sense of pleasure or comfort, and that emotional reward is hard to resist. However, it's not just about reacting to emotions, it's also about harnessing them. Emotions can be an incredibly powerful force for change when we learn to channel them in the right direction. When you're aware of the emotions that drive your behavior, you can start to use that awareness to make better choices. For instance, let's take stress. Most people view stress as something purely negative, but it doesn't have to be. Stress can actually be a signal that you're in a situation that matters to you, something that's pushing you outside of your comfort zone. Instead of running away from stress, you can choose to view it as a sign of opportunity or growth. This reframing turns the stress into a motivator, not a barrier. When you do this, your emotional state moves from being a potential source of sabotage to a source of fuel. Another powerful emotional state to consider is motivation. Motivation is not something that comes from nowhere, it's rooted in emotional energy. When you are emotionally connected to a goal or purpose, you will naturally feel motivated to work toward it. But if you have no emotional attachment to your goals, no real sense of why they matter to you, it becomes incredibly difficult to maintain the energy needed to pursue them consistently. The reason we sometimes struggle to stay motivated is that we haven't sufficiently anchored our goals to our emotional life. If you want to make behavior change stick, you need to link your desired actions to emotions that are deeply meaningful. For example, rather than saying, "I need to lose weight," you might say, "I want to feel more energetic and confident in my body so I can enjoy more time with my family and pursue my passions without feeling sluggish." By connecting the goal to something that stirs your emotions, you make it more compelling and more likely that you will stick with it when things get tough. There's also a concept in behavioral science known as temptation bundling, which is a strategy for pairing an action you need to do but might find unenjoyable with something you enjoy. It works because you're tapping into the emotional pleasure of the activity you enjoy to motivate you to complete the task that feels less appealing. For instance, if you don't love going to the gym but you enjoy listening to your favorite podcast, you could only allow yourself to listen to that podcast while exercising. The emotional reward of the podcast will give you the incentive to push through the physical discomfort of exercise, and over time the positive feelings associated with the activity will make it easier to keep going. On the flip side, there's also the power of emotional regulation. Often our emotions hijack our ability to make good decisions. When you're overwhelmed by anxiety, frustration, or sadness, you may be more prone to make impulsive decisions like binge eating, procrastinating, or giving up on your goals. The key to successful behavior change is developing the ability to pause and regulate your emotional state before acting. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. Rather, it means acknowledging and understanding them without letting them control your actions. By learning how to self-soothe and regulate your emotional responses, you can make more rational decisions and take actions that align with your long-term goals, not your short-term emotional impulses. Building emotional resilience is essential for long-term success. Life will throw obstacles, stressors, and setbacks at you, and your emotional reactions will vary based on the circumstances. But if you can learn to adapt and respond in a way that doesn't derail your behavior, you will be much more likely to succeed. This is why cultivating practices like mindfulness, journaling, meditation, or breathwork can be so effective. These tools help you regulate your emotional state in real time, creating a buffer between your emotional triggers and your actions. When you can pause, reflect, and choose a response rather than react impulsively, you create space for more intentional behavior. Another aspect of emotional influence is the role of positive emotions. Positive emotions such as excitement, joy, and gratitude are often underutilized in behavior change. People often think about emotions in a negative context, like stress or fear, but positive emotions can be just as powerful in shaping behavior. When you feel good about something, you are more likely to repeat it. If you can find ways to inject more enjoyment and satisfaction into the habits you're trying to build, they become easier to sustain. For example, if you can make exercise more fun by doing activities you love, or if you can celebrate small wins along the way, you tap into the brain's reward system, creating an emotional loop that reinforces your behavior. Emotions are not just reactions, they are potent forces that drive behavior, and when you understand them, you can use them to your advantage. You can't control every emotional state that arises, but you can learn to interpret and regulate your emotions to serve your goals. Recognizing the emotional currents beneath your behavior, reframing your emotional responses, and using emotions as motivators are all key strategies for aligning your emotional life with your actions. When your emotions are working for you, rather than against you, behavior change becomes not only possible, it becomes inevitable. One of the most significant obstacles to sustained behavior change is the misconception that transformation requires a massive all-at-once overhaul. In reality, long-term change is often the result of incremental small actions that build upon one another. People tend to underestimate the power of small wins and overestimate the necessity of dramatic overnight success. Yet it's precisely these small steps that make lasting progress not only possible but inevitable. The truth is that sustainable change comes from compounding small actions over time, and embracing the power of incremental progress is one of the most effective strategies for making real lasting change in your life. At the core of this approach is the principle of gradualism. Trying to change everything about your life in a single leap is not only overwhelming, but it's also setting yourself up for burnout and frustration. When you attempt to make radical changes all at once, like radically altering your diet, overhauling your exercise routine, and suddenly committing to a rigorous productivity schedule, you put too much pressure on yourself, and the chances of failing are far greater. The key to long-term success is to focus on one area at a time, making small improvements that you can easily integrate into your daily routine. When you adopt this mindset, you take the pressure off yourself to achieve perfection, and instead allow yourself to progress at a pace that feels manageable. Starting with small actions has several profound effects. First, it creates a sense of momentum. Success, even in small doses, fuels motivation. The brain loves progress, no matter how tiny, and it rewards you with a release of dopamine, the brain's motivation chemical. This creates a feedback loop. The more small wins you accumulate, the more motivated you feel to keep going. For example, simply committing to a 10-minute walk each day, or drinking an extra glass of water, may seem insignificant at first. But as you do these things consistently, they begin to compound, leading to bigger changes over time. Eventually, these actions form a foundation for more ambitious goals because they create a momentum that builds on itself. Another reason why small steps work is that they are far more sustainable than large, sudden changes. When you start small, you're less likely to face the exhaustion that often accompanies drastic shifts. Making huge changes requires more mental and physical energy, and while it's possible to maintain such efforts for a short period, they often lead to burnout. Small steps, on the other hand, feel more manageable. They allow you to adjust gradually, and your brain doesn't experience the same level of stress or overwhelm. This means that you're more likely to stick with it in the long run, even when challenges arise. Over time, these small steps become ingrained in your daily routine, forming new habits that require less conscious effort to maintain. Small actions also create consistency. Consistency is arguably the most important factor in making lasting change. The brain thrives on repetition, and the more consistently you engage in a positive behavior, the stronger the neural pathways that support it become. These pathways become so ingrained that the behavior becomes automatic. For example, you might start by committing to doing one push-up a day. It sounds simple, but by consistently doing it, you establish a habit. Over time, you're likely to add more push-ups to the routine without even thinking about it. You may not notice the immediate physical changes, but the fact that you've built a consistent habit means you've laid the groundwork for more significant change. This consistency is the bedrock upon which larger transformations are built. Another powerful aspect of incremental progress is that it makes it easier to build self-efficacy, the belief that you are capable of succeeding in your goals. When you start small, you're more likely to experience quick wins that build your confidence. Each time you achieve one of these small goals, you prove to yourself that you are capable of making change. These small successes accumulate, and over time they reshape your identity. Rather than seeing yourself as someone who struggles with self-discipline, you start seeing yourself as someone who is capable of progress and growth. This shift in self-belief is crucial because it creates a positive feedback loop. When you believe you can succeed, you're more likely to take consistent action, which leads to even greater success. The beauty of small incremental changes is that they give you room for flexibility and adaptation. Life is unpredictable, and things will not always go as planned. However, if you've built your change strategy around small steps, you can more easily adjust when challenges arise. You're not tied to rigid goals or perfectionism. If you miss a day or face an obstacle, it doesn't derail your entire progress. Because the changes you've made are small and sustainable, you can simply pick up where you left off without feeling discouraged or defeated. This flexibility makes the process much more resilient, ensuring that setbacks don't completely undo your progress. Moreover, small actions create room for experimentation and learning. Rather than committing to a rigid plan or a perfect approach from the start, incremental steps allow you to learn and adapt as you go. You can observe what works, what feels sustainable, and what leads to more positive results. For example, when trying to improve your productivity, you might start by setting aside just 10 minutes each morning to work on your most important task. Over time, you might notice that you're able to focus better when you eliminate distractions or when you start your day with a specific routine. These small observations can help you refine your approach, leading to continuous improvements. Instead of expecting perfection from day one, you allow yourself the freedom to experiment and evolve, gradually finding what works best for you. This approach of incremental progress also helps you celebrate the process rather than fixating solely on the end result. Too often, we set grand goals and become consumed by the idea of achieving them, but we forget to appreciate the journey. Focusing on small, actionable steps allows you to enjoy the process of change. It's in these daily actions that you learn, grow, and develop new skills and habits. And by celebrating each small success along the way, you build a sense of accomplishment and pride that makes the process more enjoyable. In the end, the power of incremental progress lies in its ability to create a positive, self-reinforcing cycle. Small actions lead to momentum, consistency, and self-efficacy, which in turn build a foundation for more significant changes. These small steps, often invisible in the short term, accumulate over time to create lasting transformation. So rather than focusing on achieving big dramatic changes in a short period, embrace the power of taking small, consistent actions that move you in the right direction. The key to long-term success lies in progress, no matter how small, and in the belief that these small steps, when compounded over time, lead to extraordinary outcomes. One of the most important aspects of achieving lasting behavior change is the understanding that it is not a linear process. In fact, behavior change often follows a cycle, one that includes inevitable setbacks, periods of stagnation, and even failure. Many people embark on the journey of self-improvement with the expectation that it will be a smooth, uninterrupted ascent to success. When they encounter setbacks or face challenges, it's easy to feel discouraged, frustrated, or even defeated. However, understanding that setbacks are not only a normal part of the process, but also a crucial component of long-term success can drastically alter the way you approach growth and change. The first thing to recognize is that setbacks do not define you. They are not a reflection of your worth, your character, or your potential. They are simply a part of the journey. When you attempt to make significant changes in your life, whether it's adopting a healthier lifestyle, becoming more productive, or improving your relationships, you will face moments where things don't go according to plan. You will make mistakes, fall off track, or face circumstances that make it difficult to continue. This is entirely normal. In fact, research in the field of neuroscience has shown that the brain actually learns more from setbacks than it does from successes. It is through failure and recovery that new neural pathways are formed, helping you adapt and improve your behavior over time. Understanding that setbacks are an inevitable part of the process shifts the way you view them. Instead of seeing them as signs of failure, you can begin to see them as valuable learning opportunities. Each setback provides you with new information about what works and what doesn't. It shows you where your weak points are, what environmental factors may be influencing your behavior, or what mental blocks you need to overcome. For example, if you're trying to improve your diet but find yourself reaching for unhealthy food when you're stressed, a setback like this reveals a trigger that you can work to address in the future. Rather than beating yourself up over the setback, you can use it as a tool for understanding yourself better and adjusting your strategy. The key to handling setbacks effectively is cultivating resilience. Resilience is not about avoiding failure, it's about how you respond when things don't go as planned. A resilient person doesn't let one mistake or setback dictate the outcome of their entire journey. Instead, they view setbacks as temporary and manageable. They acknowledge the difficulty, learn from it, and move forward with a renewed sense of determination. Resilience allows you to stay on track even when faced with adversity. It encourages you to treat setbacks as part of the natural rhythm of behavior change, rather than seeing them as insurmountable obstacles. One of the most important strategies for cultivating resilience is to practice self-compassion. When setbacks occur, it's easy to fall into negative self-talk, blaming yourself or feeling guilty. This self-criticism can be incredibly damaging to your motivation and well-being. However, research has shown that self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a friend, is a critical component of emotional resilience. When you practice self-compassion, you acknowledge that you are human and that mistakes are a natural part of growth. Rather than harshly criticizing yourself, you treat yourself with understanding, patience, and encouragement. This shifts your emotional state, helping you move forward with a clearer mindset and greater motivation to continue pursuing your goals. Another key element of handling setbacks is the importance of a growth mindset. A growth mindset, popularized by psychologist Carol Dweck, is the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort, learning, and persistence. People with a growth mindset view setbacks as temporary and as opportunities for growth, rather than signs of their limitations. This perspective fosters a greater sense of empowerment and agency, as it reinforces the idea that your actions, rather than your innate traits, are what drive change. When you adopt a growth mindset, you begin to see challenges as stepping stones rather than roadblocks. Each setback becomes a chance to improve, adapt, and become more skilled in navigating the process of change. It's also crucial to understand that not all setbacks are the same. Some setbacks are minor, perhaps you missed a workout or made an unhealthier food choice than you intended. Others might be more significant, like a major life event or a period of deep personal struggle that makes it difficult to focus on your goals. Recognizing the scale and impact of each setback allows you to respond in a way that is proportionate. Minor setbacks are usually best handled by simply acknowledging them, adjusting your plan, and moving on. Major setbacks, on the other hand, may require more time, patience, and a shift in perspective. In these cases, it's important to give yourself permission to experience the setback fully, process any emotions tied to it, and then gradually shift your focus back to your long-term goals. The ability to adapt to setbacks, whether large or small, is a hallmark of someone who is committed to continuous growth. The power of persistence cannot be overstated when it comes to overcoming setbacks. Persistence is the ability to keep going even when things aren't going well. It's the determination to continue trying, learning, and adjusting your approach until you eventually succeed. Every setback you encounter is a test of your perseverance. The difference between those who succeed and those who give up is often simply the willingness to keep going, no matter how many times you stumble. The good news is that persistence, like resilience, is a skill that can be developed over time. By repeatedly showing up, even when things aren't perfect, you build the mental and emotional muscles necessary to push through challenges and come out stronger on the other side. As you navigate the cycle of setbacks and recovery, it's important to celebrate your progress, no matter how small it may seem. Often, when we encounter setbacks, we become hyper-focused on what isn't working and forget to acknowledge what is. Celebrating even the smallest wins along the way helps to maintain motivation and reinforces the belief that progress is still happening. Each step forward, even if it's a small one, brings you closer to your ultimate goal. By recognizing these incremental successes, you build a sense of accomplishment and a positive emotional connection to your efforts, which makes it easier to stay committed in the face of future challenges. Lastly, remember that change is not a destination, it's a process. You don't arrive at a point where you're done with your transformation. Instead, the journey of growth is ongoing. You will encounter setbacks throughout your life, no matter how far along you are in your personal development. The key is to see the setbacks as part of that process and not as reasons to give up. By cultivating resilience, practicing self-compassion, maintaining a growth mindset, and persisting through challenges, you not only become better at handling setbacks, you also strengthen your ability to continue evolving and improving over time. Ultimately, setbacks are not obstacles, they are opportunities to test your commitment, learn from your experiences, and continue progressing toward your goals.